So, thank you all for checking this talk out. Today I'm going to talk about creating a headless Magento frontend with the tile stack. As pronounced, I'm Michiel Gerritsen. I'm a freelance Magento developer. You can visit me on Twitter and the old interwebs. So how this started? About a year ago, I was at a training at Yerio, and he has a course about React and Magento. I followed it, and later on I followed a course about Vue Storefront. And at the end of the day, I don't know at which one of the two it was, but he came with this sentence like, yeah, we didn't discuss server-side rendering, but it's so difficult, we can spend another full day about teaching you about how that works. And I was sitting in the car back home, and I was like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff. It's all very hard. It's a completely different tech stack. So you need to learn Node.js. You need to dive into how PWAs work. And you also have to dive into server-side rendering. And all this is hard. So I was thinking, why shouldn't I build something like this in Laravel? It's easy, the tech stack. Everybody that works with Magento probably already has some experience with Laravel. And the whole developer experience is so much better than when working with Magento. So for me, it made a lot of sense. Next to that, I have done some Laravel and Magento combinations before. So a while ago, I wrote a blog post about accessing Magento data from Magento 1 to Laravel. That was because I needed to transfer the data to some SaaS platform. Also, I did create tests for Magento 2 on Laravel Dusk. It was before the Magento functional test framework came out. So this walk through your store, places stuff in your cart, and actually places an order. And it could even work with payment providers, for example. And I even built a app for Shopify on Laravel. So Laravel, it makes it makes sense for me. So before I started, I checked out if there were alternative projects. I couldn't find one, but after talking to some people about this, someone came up with this project. They're developing the same thing, but I only spoke to them when I already created this, so that was a coincidence. So the tech stack, TAL stands for Tailwind, Alpine.js, Livewire, and Laravel. And to understand how this works, I've set up a little demo for you. So this is the Livewire demo. And here you can just filter out anything. And normally you have to use a whole lot of JavaScript to come to a result like this. I will get the project for you. Here's coming up. I hope. Sure.
Could you please make the font bigger?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Here it is. So basically, what this does, it renders this file. So it is a blade file, and it provides us with the models we want to show. Now, this is one part, and the other part is this. And this is the whole code to make the demo I just showed. So what this does, when you put in something in a search field, there will be an IX request will be done to this component, and it will render with your search, your entered search data into this field, so it will automatically filters this. So it's only like 10 pieces of code to make an interactive piece. So that's very easy to make something like that. So an Alpine, where does it go? An Alpine is basically this. It's a very simple demo, but you get the idea. Why doesn't it want to work? One, where is it? So let's show the Alpine, and it's basically only this. So you can put up an initial value in the main element, and inside that element you can interact with these variables. So in this case, when I click open dropdown, the value of open will go to true, and Alpine automatically knows I only need to show this piece when open is true. And then I have another one to disable this UL. So it hides automatically when you click outside of the UL. So these both are pretty simple to use. So I started building. The first choice I had to make was GraphQL or REST. So I've built with both techniques before, and my preference is GraphQL. And when I checked out other projects, it confirmed my choice, as GraphQL allows you to get way more data from Magento in one call, and with REST you have to do a lot of calls sometimes. So then the next question was, what GraphQL client I had to use? So I come up with this. It's basically just a file get contents, and that's about it. It puts in some headers. It passes on our query and our variables in the correct format, and that's about it. So the downside of this is you get back an array, and arrays can be great, but for transferring data, they pretty suck. Because when you pass it on to your view, for example, you don't know exactly what is available in that array. So that's why I decided to go to use DTOs, data transfer objects. And I can show you a DTO. Here we go. Oh, that's the wrong one. This one. So a DTO is nothing more than just a class where you can put in data, and you can get it out, but you can't change it. So they are basically immutable. I created a lot of from a array helper, so I can feed the array that I get from GraphQL client directly into this object, and it will create an object for me. Now this is great because I have type hinting when I'm using this in PHP Storm, for example. Next to that, when I get incorrect data, PHP will fail. It will show me an error that it has failed. So now there's one downside about DTOs. It takes a lot of time to create them. So this is one example. But I all created these by hand. So that's why I took it another step further. And I created a small library last week. And what this basically does, you can feed an URL, a GraphQL endpoint, to this, and it generates the details for this. So I didn't integrate it yet in this project, but I will definitely do that. So next thing was handling product types. Now, Magento has support for different product types, like the simples, the bundles. But how do you handle them? Because when adding a product to the cart, you have a special GraphQL mutation for every type of product. You have a mutation for simples, mutation for bundles, mutation for configurables. And you also need to show that the different types on a front end. For example, when adding to the cart, you need, with configurables, you need to show what options are available. So I solved this this way. I created different blade files. So this is simple, the blade. It's maybe a bit small, but this is for the simple products. And I have different ones for configurables. And I'm planning on to add support for bundles and other kinds of product types. Now, this is the only piece of JavaScript you're going to find together with the configurable product. And here is where you see Alpine do its thing. So basically here we say the data is what comes from this one. And when we click on the add cart button, you have to execute this function. Now, why did I do it this way and not on the server side with Livewire? For simple, that's pretty easy. But when you're working with a configurable, it gets way harder pretty quick. So that's why I decided to use Alpine for this. And here it is more justified to use JavaScript than with the simple product. So basically what I'm doing here is, do I have the amount of product options that are set by the user, is it the same as there are attributes? So all attributes are required. And if that's the case, just take the SKU from the parent product and append all attributes after that, separated by a dash. And that's how Magento allows me to add this to the cart. Now, there's one part. But also in the cart is the same approach. So a different template for every product type. Now, I created the default for the simple. So I only have a configurable blade file yet. And here it only shows the options you have selected below the product title. And last but not least, how do we add this to our cart? So I created a few different functions. When bundles are added, I will probably add bundle 2. And I created a function for those. So the next thing, caching. That's always hard. But I didn't want to call Magento for everything. I wanted also add a little bit speed. So that's why I started adding repositories. Repositories are basically a piece of code that is in charge of saving and fetching data. So I have here an example of this. When a product is added to the cart, let's check it. The result of the cart is then saved to the cache. And when we're requesting the cart, it only checks the cache. So when the cart is shown, it will never contact Magento directly. It only shows what it has in its cache. So another big thing I created was the late navigation. So what I did here, when someone selects a option in the late navigation. I let Livewire call the function select, and I add it to this array. And that's about it. And the same for removing. So, and then we trigger the event update aggregations. And if we look, let me check. Over here, this responds to the event that's thrown. So this renders the list of products, and here we can see that it actually passes on the selected options. So it builds out a query that contains all these selected options. Now that is kind of hard because most options are just this value should this key should be that value. But for example, the price filter is a little bit different, as you can supply a from, and you can supply a to, and you can supply both. So I solved that by creating a class for that that's only in charge of calculating which kind of filters should be added and how the definition of that should be, and what kind of variables should be available for that. Now, I also created a checkout. This is basically the first thing I created. And this is about the whole checkout. It consists of 5 Livewire components. So just check out the shipping address, for example. These are all kind of attributes that are required for Magento to work with. So when they are filled in, the render function is called, and I check if there's an email and a country, as that is the minimum that Magento requires. I create a DTO, a filled DTO, and I pass it on to this repository, and I pass the email on to this repository, and that's about how this works. So that's step 1. Next, we have the shipping methods. That's the wrong one. Now you can see this is some of the code I've built as first. And this doesn't use any repository or anything. It's just basically a quick, just put in a query and run it directly to Magento. So this needs optimization yet. But here I do basically the same thing. I check which methods are available. But when someone selects one, I call this function, run this mutation, and I run the update order totals. I've dispatched the update order totals event. Now the payment methods is about the same. So let's check the order totals. Now these were a bit harder because I had to do a separate query for this. I tried to cache this, but I run in all kinds of issues. So for now, it's not cached yet, but it's also not very much requested yet. So I request all these kinds of totals requested from Magento and pass it on to a DTO. And here we can see the power of the DTOs. As here we just can say from the totals I need the subtotal excluding tags. And the same goes for this kind of things. So PHP Storm knows exactly what is available. And here we can say get label, get price, whatever you need. So no more guessing. Now, what about testing? I've had presentations in the past about testing. So testing is an important part of my developer life cycle. But this project doesn't contain any tests. And that's more because I just started. I didn't know which direction I should go. And yeah, so there are no tests yet. I created a while back this repository, or this function, basically a Docker file where you or a Docker container, I have to say, you can run it in your pipeline, and then you can run unit and integration tests from this. And recently, this guy that's also created the Repeat as alternative project kicked in, and he started adding a web server for this. So in theory, I have to yet build it, but we can use this Docker container to test our implementation and if it returns the correct data. But for now, there are no tests in there yet. So, is it production ready? Well, it depends. If you are a small retailer and only need simple and configurable products, then probably yes. There are some rough edges that needs to get fleshed out, but you could already run a store on this. You could get all quite far. But if you are a more larger retailer, then probably not. So, conclusion. After all, I found the whole experience of building. I can show you the result of this first. So this is basically what I've built out. I use Tailwind because there's this library Tailwind UI that contains a whole lot of ready-to-go components. So I picked some components, put it in here, and just put in my data. So here you can see the latest navigation, the price ranges. That's maybe not the best filter. So we can filter it out until we have exactly what we want. And if you add it configurable to the cart, you get redirected to the product page. You see the totals. And here's the checkout I did talk about. So the shipping methods get we fetch them at the moment the address is available. And then we can place an order. I didn't build a checkout success page yet, so it's blank. That was expected. So conclusion, overall the development experience with this was way better than expected. GraphQL is actually pretty fast in comparison to what Magento offers. Most of the times when you're building out something in Magento, for example, something in the front end, there's a lot of waiting to because you need to flush caches and things like that. With Magento fetching the data with Laravel fetching the data from Magento, you don't have this problem. So basically, it's very fast overall, and also the development experience is pretty neat. So it's a project I'm still working on. Also, if you check out my Twitter, I try to get some input from everybody about what to add next. That's why I'm building the bundles next, for example. So thank you. Let's get it on with the questions.
Thank you, Michiel. Thank you very much for your presentation. And we've got for now a question. How do you think, what are the advantages of using Laravel? And why do not use a PWA instead? What is your opinion?
Well, a PWA is great, but you need to learn a whole tech stack from the bottom up. So, and Laravel is something a lot of people work with before. So it's easy to start with, and it's easy to understand why some things happen. So basically that.
Thank you, Michiel. I believe that is it with the questions. And thank you for the great presentation.